If you are serious about your performance and body composition, you should pay attention to your Periworkout Nutrition. I'm dietitian and coach Astrid here for another episode of the Coach's Corner. In this video, I want to focus on folks who aren't just going to the gym as part of a healthy lifestyle, but also consider themselves athletes, and their performance is highly important, as much or perhaps even more than their physique. I know that in the past few years, there's been a lot of interest in switching towards strategies that reduce the muscles, reliance on finite substrate like carbohydrates, while exploiting its relatively unlimited stores fats. So hence we see people moving more towards or trying that lower carb, high fat diet. Although this approach has been shown that it seems to increase muscles' capacity to use fat as main source of fuel, and even in well-trained athletes and supported by a few testimonials online and in social media, there are some caveats to this approach. There are several studies of athletes who even adapted to a lower carb, high fat diet, including a ketogenic version, lower than 50 grams of carbohydrate per day, having ketosis and all of that. Their performance was able to only allow people to maintain a good performance if the intensity was between low to moderate. But when intensity was very high, performance was impaired. The reason might be that fat oxidation actually requires much more oxygen to produce an amount of ATP similar to that produced by carbohydrate oxidation pathways. And at higher intensity of exercise, oxygen delivery to the muscle is not great. I could pinpoint two fundamental differences between an athlete or someone who's very serious about their training and a gym pop diet. So athletes require additional fluid to cover sweat losses and additional energy to fuel physical activity, and this extra energy to be supplied as carbohydrate from carbohydrate-based food groups. But the key point that makes sense to bring up regarding an athlete's diet relates to meal timing and snacks. Let me give you an example. You may tolerate a snack consisting of milk and a sandwich 1 hour before a low-intensity workout, but would be probably uncomfortable if the same meal was consumed before a very hard effort or very high intensity training. In any case, if you are into heavy training or doing multiple workouts a day, you actually might need to eat more than 3 meals and 3 snacks per day, and you should make the most out of every possible eating occasion. For example, you could consider eating in close proximity to the end of your workout, having more than 1 afternoon snack, or eating a substantial snack before bed. Well, now let's get to Periworkout Nutrition recommendations, shall we? We have pre, during, and post-workout nutrition. So when it comes to pre-workout nutrition, research shows that eating before exercise as opposed to exercising in a fasted state improves performance in a good proportion of athletes, of course. The meal or a snack consumed before competition or an intense workout should prepare you for the upcoming activity and leave you neither hungry nor with undigested food in your stomach. So pretty much ready to go and hit that workout. Before a training session, a meal or a snack should provide sufficient fluid to maintain hydration. So make sure you're fully hydrated, which you know that dehydration seems to impair performance. Again, if you are into really important performance, this is key. Secondly, be relatively low in fat and fiber to facilitate gastric emptying and minimize gastrointestinal distress. Be relatively high in carbohydrate to maximize maintenance of your blood glucose. Be moderate in protein to maintain some amino acids available in your muscles as well. And be composed of familiar foods to you that you tolerate well. So there are no surprises when you're actually training and no emergencies. You might be one of those who consumes and enjoy a substantial meal, let's say pancakes, juice, scrambled eggs, like a full meal, 2 to 4 hours before exercise or endurance events. Or you might be one of those who actually might suffer from severe gastrointestinal distress following such a meat meal that you might need to rely on liquid meals or something a little bit lighter, closer to your training. Or sometimes people go fasted, as you know. So make sure that you know what works best for you by experimenting with new foods and beverages during practice sessions. Like if you're in preparation for a particular competition, don't play around with meals or with new things the day of competition or the day of the endurance event. But if you're someone who is into just a regular training, it's okay to experiment every now and then with new things, as long as you are okay to have an emergency every now and then. During a training session though, so when we look at intra-workout nutrition, the primary goal for nutrient consumption is basically to replace fluid losses and provide carbohydrate. We're talking about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour for maintenance of blood glucose and rapid energy availability and fuel. Whether or not carbohydrate consumption in amounts typically provided in sports drinks, let's say 4 to 8% of glucose or carbohydrates, improve performance in events lasting perhaps 1 hour or less, has been quite controversial, but current research seems to support the benefit of this practice, especially and mostly in those who exercise in the morning after an overnight fast when liver glycogen levels are low. Those providing exogenous carbohydrates under these conditions probably would be recommended, especially if you're serious to improve your performance. But if you already ate something prior, you might not need this, or you might not need to consume any carbohydrates if your training is no longer than 1 hour. For longer training sessions though, or longer events, consuming 0.7 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per hour, that was again like between 30 to 60 grams per hour, has been shown to be very effective to extend endurance performance. Consuming carbohydrates during exercise is even more important in situations where athletes have not carbohydrate loaded, consume pre-exercise meals, or if you're restricted energy intake for weight loss. Thinking about your carbohydrate intake during exercise will depend on what is your specific situation. So in summary, these nutrition guidelines are specifically and especially important for endurance events, lasting probably a little bit longer than an hour. If it's under an hour, you probably won't need this, but it could be beneficial if you've been fasting or you haven't eaten very much in the past few days because you're energy restricted and a calorie deficit. Now, post-workout nutrition. Timing and composition of your post-workout meal or snack depend on the length and the intensity of what happened in your training session, whether glycogen depletion occurred and when the next intense workout will occur as well. Timing of post-exercise carbohydrates intakes affects glycogen synthesis over the short term, especially if you're competing or doing several sessions in a day. So consumption of carbohydrates beginning immediately after the first training session results in higher glycogen levels at 6 hours post-exercise than when you had an ingestion of carbohydrates delayed, or if you just take too much time and even after 2 hours. You might still have some glycogen synthesis, but it will be much less. However, you might not need to adhere to this if you take 1 or more days in between intense training sessions to recover, because when sufficient carbohydrate is provided over a 24-hour period, the timing of intake does not appear to affect the amount of glycogen stored, provided that you also are not needing this rapid available fuel for another training session straight away. Nevertheless, consuming a meal or a snack in close proximity to end of exercise might still be important to meet your daily carbohydrate and energy goals anyways. Now, the type of carbohydrate consumed can also affect post-exercise glycogen synthesis. With regards to whole foods, consumption of carbohydrates with high glycemic index results in higher muscle glycogen levels 24 hours after exercise as compared with the same amount of carbohydrates provided as foods with a low glycemic index. The usefulness of these findings, though, must be considered in conjunction with your overall diet and should likely be reserved for occasions when you want to maximize your post-exercise glycogen synthesis as much as possible. However, when we're thinking about isocaloric amounts of carbohydrates or carbohydrate plus protein and fats being provided following endurance or resistance training, glycogen synthesis rates are pretty similar. So adding protein does not necessarily increase or enhance glycogen repletion. Nevertheless, including protein in a post-exercise meal might provide your needed amino acids for muscle protein repair, for good recovery, and promote more anabolic hormonal profile for your gains. Therefore, consuming a mixed meal providing carbohydrates, protein, and fat soon after a strenuous competition or a very interesting training session is recommended and dietitian approved if you want to maximize hypertrophy and gains. Protein intake should be prioritized and consumed ideally within the first few hours after a training session. The timing will depend on pre-workout meal though, overall protein intake throughout the day, and your routine. In summary, the dietary goal of a post-workout nutrition plan is to provide adequate energy and carbohydrates to replace muscle glycogen, to ensure rapid recovery if you are glycogen depleted after exercise, carbohydrate intake of 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight during the first half an hour, and again every 2 hours for 4 to 6 hours will be adequate to replace glycogen stores. Again, this is not for the average gym goer. We're talking about people who are perhaps training a few times during the same day. They're having 2 to 3 sessions, or they have probably like boxing and they are also lifting, or they have like BJJ and training in the afternoon, or they're combining a different type of trainings the same day. And lastly, protein consumed after training will provide amino acids for building and repair of your muscle tissue. To close full circle, when choosing a snack before or after a training session, try having a protein and carb-based meal or a snack roughly 1 to 3 hours before training to best fuel your workout. The larger and denser the meal, the longer you should give yourself a little bit more time before that day's training session. If you enjoy having a protein shake immediately after training and you have the calorie budget to do so, you could definitely meet your post-workout needs this way. However, if you do not want to do this, or you don't have the availability or the capacity to do that, you can go home and have a full meal while still obtaining the same benefits. I hope you took some notes and learned today a bit more about the importance of your nutrition around training sessions. Tell me something. Are you someone who focuses on resistance training, endurance training, a little bit of both? Tell me down below in the comment section. Remember to like, subscribe, give some hearts. Follow me at antidiet_dietitian in my Instagram. And for coaching inquiries, you can email me to astrid@biolayne.com. And I see you in the next one.